is going on, Governor? It's Chisgule here, and today we want to answer an important question for you. If you and your friends are ganging up on a T5 player and all you have are T4, what commander should you bring to take them down? Hello my friends and welcome back. In this video we're going to be talking about combos that free-to-play or light spenders and Rise of Kingdoms should use to take on T5 players. And we're going to give you some guidelines to help you be successful. If you like Rise of Kingdoms videos where we talk about commanders and pairings, then please do like and subscribe. We are really passionate about finding those optimal pairs, and we are a sponsored creator with Rise of Kingdoms. P.S. If you want to see more videos where we talk about commander pairings for free-to-play players, let me drop a couple cards up in the top as we go through this video, and you can check those out when you're at the very end and enjoy some additional combos that you might not have thought of. So let's get into 3 pairings that I think will give you some serious distance when you're battling against some T5 players. And you know, I should set the expectation here, right? That like, even with the perfect marches, it's not like you're magically going to start winning fights. If you're going to take on a T5 player, it needs to be you and your friends outnumbering that T5 player. But if you have these commander combos, I think you're going to do better. Let's talk about what some of those combos are. A bunch of these you've heard me talk about before, but the first one I want to mention is going to involve an Ethelflaed primary. Ethelflaed's, of course, got to be involved in this for the debuff, reducing the attack, the defense, and the health of the marches that you're hitting. But the pairing that I think you would use as a secondary to her that would be kind of cool and do a ton of damage is actually going to be Osmond. Ethelflaed Osmond is going to be the first pair I'm going to recommend if you and your friends are ganging up on a T5 player. The reason that I like the Ethelflaed Osmond pair is that you're going to be able to bring more troops onto the battlefield, which is going to give you a lot more effectiveness, and in addition, you're going to be machine gunning out skills from Ethelflaed's support tree when you get the rejuvenate talents. I'll show you what our talents should be in just a second. But what I want to highlight here is this skill here. The active skill is used, you deal an additional 400 damage factor. So when Ethelflaed uses her active skill, boom, 400 damage factor. Then 2 seconds later, Osmond uses his, boom, another 400 damage factor. That is a really powerful combo that's going to put a lot of punch onto the target. The Osmond-Ethelflaed pairing, I think, is super legit. Now, of course, there is another commander you could use as a secondary or primary with Ethelflaed. That's Joan of Arc. You've heard me talk about that combo before, though. One person needs to bring a Joan of Arc to this party. You only need like 1 or 2 if you're ganging up on a T5. So I'm not going to hone in too much on the Joan of Arc. I'm going to assume you have one somewhere in this group, which is going to make that Ethelflaed Osmond really powerful. If somewhere else in the collection of marches, Joan of Arc is giving this buff over here. This is very powerful. 200 rage over the course of 4 seconds, especially with the Ethelflaed Osmond pair, is going to do work. And there's another pair here that is going to do serious work if it's got this kind of rage being fed in when you're ganging up on this T5 player. And that is going to be an Cid with Herman. Now I know you've heard me mention this combo before. You have heard me mention this combo before. The way that this pairing needs to work is you need to have a Herman primary and Cid secondary. And the thing that you're trying to do is silence the target and disarm them for a full 3 seconds. Let me explain exactly how this works. Herman's first skill is going to fire off. Boom. It's going to do the damage. It's going to decrease the rage of the target. And it's going to silence them for 2 turns. Now, on the next turn, they're still going to be silenced. And on the next turn, Cid is going to do his active skill, which is going to be a disarm effect. The target is still silenced. And on the next turn, the disarm effect from Cid is going to be in place. That's 3 seconds of silence. It has to be Herman primary with Cid secondary. Great news there. The Herman is a lot easier to level up and star up. Now, on Cid, this commander could be a 5-1-1-1, okay? And the target you're hitting is going to be disarmed for a full 3 seconds. And with that rage engine rolling, you're going to be disarming them pretty frequently. That means that they're not going to be able to use their active skills. And while they're totally disarmed here, their normal attacks are also going to be disabled. If you've got a bunch of Herman and El Cid slaying whatever it is that you're hitting, the target you're hitting will be substantially less effective. And that is one of the counters to Attila Takeda, is to be using some Herman El Cids to get that silence chain rolling. That is one of the only acceptable marches to be swarming an Attila Takeda with, is Herman El Cid, in order to get the silence chain going. And you got to really know what you're doing. Of course, that'll probably be a lot easier in the future, card up in the top where we talk about the changes to Attila and Takeda. Okay, so let's say you've got those 2 marches that we were describing rolling. You've got some Ethelfled Osmonds doing really big punch. You've got your Herman and El Cid taking out the target's ability to do attacks back. This is really very effective and very powerful. Is there another march that you could bring that would be really, really good? And I want to try to stay here in the realm of like the free-to-play, low spend, and like, look, I think it's fair to say a 5-1-1-1 El Cid is achievable, okay? As like a free-to-play-ish low spend. This one is expertise. Yours doesn't need to be to get the effect that we're looking for over here. Max the first skill before you proceed. The last march that I think could be really helpful on the battlefield is going to be Pelagius and Boudica. I think that that combination is super effective. The reason is that they're both generating a lot of rage. They're both doing some amount of healing, which is going to give you the sustain you need to actually be hitting on T5. And they do decent damage. I think the Boudica-Pelagius combo is pretty gosh darn solid. And if you're using Pelagius primary, which you should, that's going to give you the cavalry talents, which are going to let you get away when you get low. And I'll show you right over here. Here's a build that I think is really solid for cavalry. These charge talents are going to be super helpful in your getaway, right? And I mentioned I would give you some Ethelfled talents. I think there's not a lot of variety I would recommend for those talents. A build like what we've got right over here is what I would be recommending if you're using a mixed march. You don't have to. You could drop the points over here and make your way up to close formation. I think that would be a fine variation of this build. You also could try to hinder their march speed more if you wanted, and drop more points into Cage of Thorns. And I do like the idea of just sticking to all cavalry or whatever is going to counter this T5 march that you're up against. There is one more set of talents that I really ought to show you, and that is what to use on Herman. If you're using the Herman Cid combo, which I think you really should be, it's a good invest. I mean, we're still working on Herman kind of for this purpose, just to play around with it some more. We're all in on the skill tree. You want to generate as much rage as you can to make that silence just go constantly. So we're grabbing a bunch of rage over here. We've got a few more points to put into this commander, so we still need to do that. But I would prioritize the skill tree as you're leveling them up, and then make your way over to Razor Sharp, then make your way up to Venomous Sting, and last but not least, head on over to Full Quiver. That seems like a great place to drop some points. We've been kind of sloppy with this build. We got 1 over here, 2 over there. It's fine. We'll probably put our last points into Full Quiver and Razor Sharp once we level up this commander just a smidge more. As I mentioned, you and your friends, you're kind of like ganging up on this T5 player. Somewhere in this lineup, there's got to be some Joan of Arcs. Where could you put Joan of Arc? Where could you slot in a Joan of Arc to these combos that I think could be pretty good? You really can't break up the Herman Cid combo. That's got to stay as it is. But what you could do is you could, again, put the Joan of Arc in with the Ethelfled, and I think that's a pretty optimal place for that to be. The other place that I think you could swap in the Joan of Arc is going to be with the Pelagius and Boudica march. You could use Pelagius as a secondary to Joan of Arc, and I think that would be totally fine. Because there's Rage Gen over here, that means you're going to be machine gunning out the first skill of Joan of Arc, which is really powerful. You're also doing some healing over here. So with Joan of Arc as the primary, you could use a build sort of like this, and you can get the counterattack talents so that when you're doing healing, you're going to do some extra damage. This, I think, would be a decent route to go. Of course, if you were using all cavalry instead of all archers, you get charge instead of full quiver, which is what we've put them into over here, because we're kind of going in on archers a little bit. That build, by the way, this build is fine. This is a fine build that you could use. The reason I struggle with a Joan of Arc primary is that, you know, gosh darn it, you don't really need siege unit strength to be increased, and infantry, and archers. Like, you can't really easily go in on one unit type with a Joan of Arc primary, and that's really a function of the integration tree. So those are the pairings that I think you should be using if you're going to take out a T5 player with you and your buddies, and you're going to gang up on them, right? And that context is really important. Right? You're not going to like solo wreck a T5 player and all 5 of their marches with your 5 marches just because you're using some of these combinations that I'm recommending. That's not going to fly, okay? But what I do think is that if you're bringing some of these marches and you're bringing a whole group of you going together, T5 players will struggle, and their T5 are going to cost a whole heck of a lot to heal in the hospital. Some T5 are not going to care about that, but like most are at some point going to struggle with the resources they need to repair. So I think that if you do bring this combination of marches with you and your buddies and you out freaking swarm that T5 player, you're going to do some serious work on the battlefield. Let me know down below in the comments what you think of these combinations. There's, of course, other commanders that will be great for this activity. If you're bringing only one march, you could use a Belisarius primary and get away because you have the mobility tree. That's a thing you could do. You could go all in on sort of a more tanky infantry strategy, but I feel like that makes you more of a sitting duck, so I kind of wanted to avoid that. There are combos I've mentioned in other videos, like a Joan of Arc and a Scipio, which you try to make your Joan of Arc more tanky. I think that's a decent choice. I think that's a totally decent choice. You could bring it onto the battlefield. And maybe that will be my runner-up. Joan of Arc primary, Scipio secondary. That would maybe be my runner-up. But the combos that we mentioned, take them onto the battlefield. Challenge those T5s if you outnumber them. And you can actually start to bully them pretty effectively. If you enjoyed the video, like and subscribe. That's your way of giving me a virtual high five. I really appreciate it. And until next time, you have fun smashing the kingdom.